welcome to the PRX panel, which is hosted by Political Research Exchange, the flagship open access journal of the ECPR. This panel marks a transition in the life of the journal. Simona Guerra and I are coming to the end of our term and will be stepping down as editors-in-chief at the end of this month. And we're handing over to an excellent new team of editors, Robert Huber, my co-host here, joined by Stephen van Howard, Marta Lorimer, and Lisa Zanotti, who couldn't be here today. When PRX was launched 5 years ago, the big issue was the move into open access and open scholarship. It was clear that academic publishing was undergoing significant transformation, but no one knew exactly how it was going to pan out, what with the business models, the structures, and all the rest of it. The ECPR at that point did a very bold and very important thing. The society moved into this world of uncertainty with a mission to try to ensure that whatever the shape of the outcome, the visions and values of the scholarly community would still be at the core of this developing field. And that was a very important thing, was pioneering, and that's exactly what a scholarly society should do. Today, the transformation of academic publishing is still very much ongoing. The uncertainty is still there. But we now also face a development that promises to be equally transformative for research and for publishing for our entire field. And yet this also calls for equal reflection on the part of the scholarly community about what is important here, what our priorities are, what values we would like to see at the core of this development for our field, and how to achieve this. And this issue, of course, is generative AI. What we're talking about today is generative AI as the algorithmic capacity for learning and creating content in the form of code, text, audio, images, and video. Our colleagues, political scientists, and many of the people on the panel are already studying the implications of this in its various forms in political communication and participation, public administration, and policy. But the developments also impact us. It impacts political research, how we do our research in everyday practice, in advancing possible methods and data. It impacts how we assess and validate the research, and it assesses and how we communicate it. It opens up opportunities for advancing our field, but it also raises important questions about the role of researchers in knowledge production, appropriate research infrastructures, and ultimately the public perception of academic research and its capacity to give insight into social and political questions. So we're delighted to have assembled such an excellent set of people to join us today to discuss these questions with us. Marcel Becker from Radboud Universiteit Nijmegen, Elizaveta Kuznetsova from the Weizenbaum Institute, Berlin. Online, Priya Madina, director from Taylor & Francis, Director of External Affairs and Policy, and also online, Malin Rönnblom of Karlstad University. So welcome to all of you. And I'd like to ask you to introduce yourselves further, who you are and your roles, and why this topic matters to you. Marcel, can I invite you to start?
Well, thank you for inviting me. Marcel Becker, Radboud University, Nijmegen, the Netherlands. My research focus is applied ethics, not political philosophy. Sorry for that. Last years, I've been working on the ethics of digitalization, of course, privacy issues, but also the question of how professional values come under pressure or just change by digitalization. And the interesting thing is that this discussion is different from profession to profession, and that there are even differences between scientific fields. It might be the case that developments that are embraced in one science are detested in another science. So I'm very happy that we now not discuss AI in general, but that we focus on our own profession.
Elizaveta, please.
Yes, my name is Elizaveta Kuznetsova. I'm a senior researcher at Weizenbaum Institute in Berlin. Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. I think it's an amazing opportunity to discuss these really relevant and exciting topics. I lead a research group at Weizenbaum Institute where we study the relationship between algorithmic systems on social media platforms and search engines and disruptive content like propaganda, disinformation, misinformation, and so on. So I am very interested in all sorts of developments in AI and of course also in generative options, like now they are popping up a lot. And so right now we're also researching ChatGPT, Bing chat, trying to understand how they deal with disruptive content like misinformation, disinformation, fake news, and so on. So that's where my interest comes from.
Thank you. Priya.
Hi everyone, I'm Priya Madina. I head up the External Affairs and Policy Department at Taylor & Francis. I mean, there's lots of reasons why I care about AI, but I think, you know, the two main reasons are that, well, firstly, it's becoming increasingly part of my job, as you can imagine, in policy and external affairs. And I guess in a more sort of general, personal way, in a way, it's reshaping essentially lots of industries, redefining the way we live and interacting with the world. So I think on two levels, personally and professionally, you know, it's a really intriguing part of policy development. And the sort of the main area that I would say is occupying mine and my team's attention is probably the large language models, as Elizaveta referred to. ChatGPT is one of them that have exploded onto the scene recently. So we've been quite focused on that area recently in my work.
Thank you. And Malin, please.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Malin Rönnblom. I'm a professor of political science at Karlstad University, Sweden. And I was supposed to be with you in Prague today, but a broken toe made this trip impossible. So I'm happy that I can participate online. I'm also the chair for the Committee for the Humanities and the Social Sciences at the Swedish Research Council. So this committee is the responsible body for the funding calls for the Swedish Research Council when it comes to this broad field. And in my research, I'm particularly interested in how the implementation of AI technologies in the public sector, also how this affects the democratic values, you can say, and also how this transformation is depending on the so-called big tech industry and the implications for both democracy and the public sector. So I think that you can say that I'm here with two hats because as the chair of this committee, we have an ongoing discussion on what, for example, ChatGPT and other AI tools mean for both writing and assessing applications. But of course, this is also partly interesting in relation to my own scholarly work. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. My name is Robert Huber. Thank you, Alexandra, for this introduction. I would like to start with the first question, but before we go there, I would like to invite all of you and those who join us online. If you have any questions, just raise your hand and I'll try to direct the microphone to you at the next possible moment. And the same online, I will try to summarize your question whenever I see a gap where to fit this in. So just to make this as open as possible. So, okay, I would like to ask the first question, because quite often, and the starting statements already indicated this, we think of AI as a threat, as a challenge, but also we see some benefits. And of course, publishing and academic research is an area where this also is the case. So I would like to start asking explicitly about the key benefits before moving on to the challenges. Of generative AI in academic research and publishing. And I would like to start with Priya to get your publisher perspective on this before then handing over to the rest of the panelists. So may I hand over back to you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you for starting with the benefits, because I think, like you say, it is quite easy to sort of start with the challenges. So I think in publishing, we've seen that, if AI is carefully deployed, it's definitely got lots of opportunities across the publishing spectrum. You can improve and streamline, as you can imagine, some processes. And I wanted to sort of bring this to life a bit by giving a few what we call kind of user cases across the spectrum. So firstly, from an author perspective, which I think is close to everyone's heart here, a couple of examples are you can really help improve the quality and evaluate the quality of the manuscript for better readability. So we've seen, for example, some cases where researchers whose native language, for example, isn't English, it might enhance their sort of readability in that aspect. In terms of more on the submission and review stage, and again, this sort of highlights some of the challenges a little bit, but there is opportunities for some AI tools to detect plagiarism, for example, and look at quality of citations. Again, I stress if this is done properly, that's also a good benefit. And we've already seen some tools being produced, which actually help scan papers to sort of highlight that integrity. And then what we've been seeing in Taylor and Francis actually is that we can help sort of see and summarize some content into more layman's terms. We often get told in publishing that, we have this wealth of great trusted information, but it would be really useful if, even when it's open access, if it could be easier to sort of understand and read. So, that's another use, that making knowledge accessible to the general public, that's what we're all here to do. But before I finish, I just wanted to say that another point, that a lot of these use cases are very much in their infancy. So, ourselves and other publishers were still very much playing with these things. And so we don't have the full picture yet. And obviously, the thing is about AI is that they're prone to inaccuracies and mistakes. So like I said at the beginning, we just need to be aware that it has to be carefully deployed. So I know we'll come on to challenges later, but I just wanted to give a caveat that this is all, assuming that everything works well and everything's done in the correct way for these things to work.
Excellent, thank you. Marcel, do you want to follow up on that?
Yes, well, in addition to that, I think as a philosopher, I do conceptual work. AI can be a conversation partner. Large language models have rhetorical capacities, as I've elaborated in my paper. They tell stories, more or less convincing stories. And when you use them as a conversation partner, they might stimulate our creativity. They might bring in new lines of arguments in an accessible way. Compare that to art. Large language models can be very creative, as artists have shown. You even have the so-called creative adversarial networks. So when artists use language models to stimulate creativity, why shouldn't we scientists not use them in the same way? Only on the condition that we know how to deal properly with them. But that's for later.
Thank you, Marcel. Malin, what are your thoughts on the benefits? Where do you see this helping us in publishing or research?
Well, risking being the kind of negative person here, I think it's partly a challenge to see the benefits. Of course, I see them, as Priya said also, not least concerning, for example, me and others not having English as our first language, and different kind of AI tools that could help us with that. But I think that, and of course, there are literary overviews that could more easily be done, and so on. But I also think that it's, I think the challenges are more pressing right now, or reflexivity around what do we really want to do with this, instead of being more, I feel that I'm, in the discussions I have with colleagues, for example, I feel a bit that we are very reactive to things that are coming to us, instead of thinking, as we will discuss, I know later, more like, well, how do we want to be as researchers, for example, and of course, enhancing creativity. I can see that, and that's great. At the same time, I also see a university setting or a research environment where a lot of us would like to engage more with each other, but that the academic structure is more and more kind of preventing us from doing this. So I'm sorry, I don't really, the benefits are not really my strong side at the moment.
I was aware of that. That's why I asked you. But we'll talk extensively about the challenges as well. Elizaveta, may I just hand over to you? Do you have an opinion on how this will benefit us as researchers as well? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I will only add one point because I think a lot of concerns have been raised and we know about them, but also I feel we often focus only on the systems that already exist, like chatbots. But I see it also as a big playground for actually further development, and we can use those systems to also develop new systems that are more that do not have those concerns that we're going to discuss now during this entire panel, and so that's where I see the positive, right? That it's really what we make out of it, and I think we can make a lot out of it. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks a lot. Do you want to jump in there? No. Okay. Can you just very briefly, before I jump over to the challenges, give me a sense? Is it better to hear us now? Is this working all right for you in the back? Kind of? Okay. So we still should speak up a bit more. Okay. So let's just make sure we all speak up properly. Yeah. We should be as close to the mic as possible. That's not the rockstar life I had in mind when joining PRX. So let's move on to the challenges. We already heard there are some benefits, right? And potentially powerful benefits that will assist us in research. So what are the key challenges? And Malin, given that you already said that you're very skeptical about this, why don't you kick us off with where you see the core challenges with AI in research and in publishing?
Well, I think that the core challenge, one of the core challenges at least, is this, that we are being very reactive towards, not really proactive, and at the same time, and that we as researchers also become. And I don't mean, of course, there are researchers that are more skilled in the actual tools. So now I'm talking more from a social scientist, qualitative working researcher, that perspective. But I think that it's something around that we kind of react on things that are coming, and instead of trying to be more kind of proactive on how we really want to use this kind of technologies, which I think this panel is a good example of maybe being more proactive. But with this said, I think that and of course we all know this in a way, that what we put in to AI technology is not neutral in any way. The kind of patterns of privilege that we see in society, that we see in research, is of course also inside these tools. And I think that there, and even if we know that, I think there is a tendency that we still treat AI tools as more neutral or more objective or just technology, which I find a bit scary, to be honest. That we kind of forget that what we put in is what we get out. And of course, with generative AI, things also happens. We know that with the data inside, but still the data is, the data that we have produced earlier. So I think that's an important point. I also think that there is something around that AI technology is there to promote even more efficiency. It's kind of a discourse I see in academia around efficiency. Everything should be so super efficient. Is that what we think that research should be? And I connect this very much to the whole kind of restructuring of academia, what I call new public management or neoliberalization of the academia, or whatever you like how you would like to phrase this. And I also think that that this discourse is not really helping us doing more proactive and creative things with generative AI. So I'm really appreciating the good suggestions that we heard from the panel. And just to finish, I think the third aspect here is actually what you could call the control of the tools that we are using. For example, what does it mean if we encourage ourselves and our students to use, for example, ChatGPT in doing different things with our research, to actually feed ChatGPT with our data? Because this is not, you know, I see the university and the academic setting as one of the strong pillars to be autonomous in a world where we need to, again, struggle for democracy. And I think that there is something around control here, knowing that that a lot of the tools that we use are actually owned by the so-called big tech companies. So that's kind of my black scenery here. And hopefully I'm just too negative and maybe also too ignorant yet to see the potentials, which of course, there are no going back. We are just going forward. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for these challenges that you see, because they tackle a couple of important questions, right? So, Elizaveta, what are your thoughts on the challenges? Where do you see challenges, or do you see challenges?
Well, I totally agree with everything that Malin has just listed in terms of challenges. It's true. In particular, bias is perhaps the most prominently discussed challenge that exists with any kind of AI, including also search engines. We've seen it a lot with search engines. And I think if I may get it a little bit more technical here. So when we talk about bias in AI systems, we mainly talk about source bias, because these type of systems usually prioritize good information sources, and then they label what is a good information source and what is a bad information source. And obviously that means that they will mainly prioritize established sources of information, and those established sources of information tend to produce dominant discourses, and exclude discourses that are less popular. And this is the problem. But again, it doesn't necessarily come from AI. It comes from how our knowledge is produced in society. So we can then tackle this, and we haven't found a way to tackle this. But I guess what could be done, maybe, or as an idea to change this, that AI or algorithms change this prioritization based on source and focuses more on the quality of content. But this is really not so easy. And in particular with content that is new. So because, and in particular with ChatGPT that is trained on the data set before 21, we know how difficult it is for this chat to deal with information that we just try to ask it, like what's going on right now, and it cannot answer this question. But I mean, this is one problem. And the other problem I see that perhaps is even more big is the randomization of content. So, and information, and that leads to information inequalities for users. I'll explain what I mean. So for example, when you input something into ChatGPT or another chat, even if you use the same prompt, it will give you different results every time you input that prompt. So it basically has a lot of randomization in its output. Similar happens to search engines. This means that, and then search engines even prioritize that based on your location, based on your prior history of searching for things. So this means that if we look at the entire ecosystem of information globally, this means that different communities, different users are exposed to very different information, and there is no consistency in that and no control over that. And this is the problem. There are ways of tweaking that. There are ways of creating certain benchmarks, and this is what some chatbots and search engines actually do. They try to produce very consistent output on specific topics, like, for example, certain fake stories, known disinformation stories that if you, I don't know, Google whether there are biolabs in Ukraine, most likely Google will answer, no, they're none, it's a fake story. And the same will happen with ChatGPT and Bing Chat, because it's a known information. It's been verified, so they understand that this is a false story. But this is only one topic. And it cannot be extrapolated to the entirety of information out there. And so these systems are constantly trying to balance this prioritization and personalization, customization of their outputs to the user, and this ability to give you consistent results. And this is a challenge, and I honestly do not have a good solution. I don't think that it's so easy, because this is how these systems are designed. So I guess it is important that we're aware of this design, and then we're able to educate users on those problems. I think that's perhaps the most important part of us, of what we can do as social scientists.
Thanks a lot. This was very insightful, and we will come back to some of these questions, like best practices, a bit later today. So, Marcel, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, related to the last point, what we see in the field of lawyers is that all kinds of commercial AI systems are developed to support the lawyers' work, but they are for sale. It means that the people with more money, they can buy them, and the people with less money can't afford them. So it might be that existing inequalities are aggravated because when these tools are commercialized. That's not yet the case, but it will be the case probably in the future. So that aggravates the idea of inequality. And secondly, well, these systems not just present facts, they tell stories, and stories are convincing. Stories put facts in a certain framework. So the problems of bias and the problems of normativity that is implicit, that is hidden, even becomes worse when people hear stories, because bias and frames are in stories often not made explicit. So the normativity is even a worse problem than a few years ago.
Thanks a lot, Marcel. So now we talked a lot about normative concerns when working with AI, with generative AI. So Priya, what is your view from a publisher's perspective to kind of close this bracket? What are your thoughts? What are the challenges that you face in your work as part of the publishing process?
Yeah, I'm glad I'm kind of closing on this, because it's really useful to hear the academic perspective, because it's actually not that dissimilar as you would imagine from mine. So as you can imagine, as a publisher, our modus operandi is making sure that the information that we put out in the ether is, peer reviewed, is validated, it's non-biased, all those things. So then kind of coming face to face with something potential that doesn't do those things, in simple terms, is, quite a dichotomy. So, these large language models, they're trained on information that's available to them on the internet. So as everyone pointed out, we can't be sure that that's valid. We can't be sure that it's not biased. And it might even be purposefully, misleading and unverified. So, without even putting fault on any tool or anything, if you're just going what's literally on the internet, it's bound to reflect some of those biases. So, as I said in the benefits, if AI can be used as an aid to generate and help academic research with the right checks and balances, this is all good. But, at the same time, it can also contaminate the research landscape and lead to those, flawed papers and unreliable findings. So that's kind of like the dilemma we face. The only thing I would say, and I quite like to end on a positive, which is that if you're going to express a concern, it's good to say something about how you might be able to mitigate it. So I would say if we can find a way as a kind of ecosystem to make sure the right checks and balances are in place, to make sure that whatever is out there is as good as it can be, then I think that's a good start. And I think Malin said, AI is here to stay. So if it's here to stay, we should be trying to work with it, not kind of against it, I would say.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. Before I hand over to Alexandra, let me remind you, if you have any questions, please just raise your hand or write in the chat, and we will try to fit it in at the next possible moment. keep this as interactive as possible. So Alexandra, may I hand over to you?
Yeah, right. So thanks for that. And these relate to sort of two different areas. And coming back, we'll come back to what you ended on there, Priya, in just a moment. But first, I mean, would you say that these developments change the role of the researcher or the political scientist, or first, the researcher in academic research? I mean, does it shift emphasis regarding what we would expect from a good political scientist, what they should be doing or be good at? Malin, what would you say about that? For better or for worse, shifting this?
Thank you. During my career, I've been working a lot with the concept of reflexivity. And I was also thinking about that concept and the kind of a reflexivity thinking going to this, you know, what is the function or the position of us as political scientists or scholars more generally. So in trying to be more kind of proactive, maybe this very fast transformation that suddenly we don't really know if, you know, have someone of us written this text, or is it actually written by some kind of AI technology? I think maybe this gives us the moment in time to actually reflect over our positions in society as being researchers. What do we want to be? I don't know, but I think when I talk with colleagues, and this has been going on for many years, it's like being a scholar could, and especially a junior scholar, could be very much the same thing as being in a kind of a chicken race, where you need to publish or perish, you know, the whole story about what we actually do as researchers that many of us maybe don't want to do. Of course, we want to publish. That's, you know, part of our work, that we want to reach out. But is this the moment in time where the numbers of publications maybe not is that important as the actual quality and content? And of course, then we have the whole discussion around quality and was it a good paper and etc. etc. I just think that maybe this is a point in time where we could reflect around what do we want to be as researchers? How do we see our position and place in society, especially now when I think that there are several huge transformations going on, not just the one that we are talking about now, but, you know, we have the whole climate situation, we have different kinds of threats to democracy in different ways. And I think that we, in this moment in time, as especially scholars in political science, are needed. And maybe this is a way of starting that discussion. I know that was not, you know, a simple answer, but that's the best I can do for the moment. Thank you.
No, it's good enough. It's a good start for the discussion. Marcel, I think you have a take on this as well.
Well, in preparation of the discussion, I had a thought experiment. Suppose we would have a conference like this, in which speakers only present ideas that they have borrowed from ChatGPT. We would call it an ECPR ChatGPT conference. What would that mean for our science? It's still people that determine what they borrow from ChatGPT. So we still must have very good scientists to have such a conference. Perhaps we must have even better scientists. We need skills to master technology, but in the end, these skills are steered by normative framework. And what we consider to be the standards of good political science, they don't fall away when we have new technologies. We should put those new technologies in the framework of the standards of political science that we already have. And I do not see immediately how the core standards of political science, being reflective, seek connection to society, but at the same time being critical to society, leaning on the philosophical tradition, presenting original lines of thought, doing good empirical research, starting with hypothesis, how these core ideas of our changes, our science, how these core ideas change under the influence of new technologies. I do not see that now.
Elizaveta, do you,
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Marcel, that I don't think that it's changing our work that much. Honestly, I don't think so. Because we have used AI tools before. We've Googled, everybody has Googled, right? I think. So it's not that we are completely changing our processes. The only element is this productive element, right? Generating text that we didn't quite use that much before. But I still think that we define the problems. ChatGPT does not define any problems, and it's our job. And I guess what I find is important for us as scientists is to, yes, reflect on what it actually means to do research and how we can adjust it now with new tools and how we can make these tools work for us, right? Not just like be afraid of them. I think that being afraid of them is the worst thing we can do, because then we just are not thinking rationally. And perhaps the most important thing is that we have to really understand what's going on. We have to understand how those tools work exactly. And that's our duty, because without knowing what we're dealing with, we cannot regulate it, we cannot control it, we cannot make it work for public good. And I think it's also, yeah, I mean, it's not helpful to ban such tools. I know that a lot of research institutions in Germany actually are already doing that. They do not allow to use those tools. I don't think it's the best strategy, because if we don't use them, we're missing out. We do not see how things develop. And this also can underprivilege us. You know, we have to be on top of things. Yeah, so that's my take.
and that's a good segue to the next, which is about sort of the research infrastructures. How can we move forward in using these? So, Robert.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. So we already heard the benefits, challenges, and to some extent this comes back to questions on how do we need to reflect on the use of these, right? And so Malin, you already started and illustrated some concerns on the use of these tools. Do you want to elaborate a bit more in more detail where you really see precisely where researchers or everybody in the room, everybody using these tools need to reflect on? What are the core aspects here that you see?
Thank you. Well, I just want to stress what Elizaveta just said around this more knowledge. I think that we actually, all of us more or less needs to be more knowledgeable on what kind of AI tools that we are using at the moment, how that do they work, but also the potentials that are around us, and also how I think that we again need to reflect on what are we doing when we, for example, are locking in our systems in different universities, that we are so much in the hands of a specific company, for example, that actually could close down everything we do. If all our documents, all our emails, all our research data, etc., it's in the cloud, that it's not ours. Of course, there are a lot of good, agreements, and maybe this sounds, like I'm a very, very conspiracy-driven person, but I think that, and it's also risking being a bit naive, saying, well, we need to create our own systems. Of course, this is not possible. It's a huge infrastructure we are talking about. I just think that, again, that we need to reflect around why do we use different tools, what happens to our data, how could we as a research collective discuss what this means, and I'm sorry for not being more specific, but I just think that, of course, there are also a lot of good ways of collaboration between like the tech industry and the universities. I just think that it's important to know that what we actually are doing, and risking now pointing to the whole sector, saying that we are naive, including myself. I think that we are a bit naive around the systems and tools that we are using every day. And I also think that maybe we would still, use them, but we would know more about them. Just me refusing to get an account on Google for Google Documents, and it's driving my colleagues crazy, because why couldn't you just do it? And I say, why should I? I thought that I was a public employee in a Swedish university and that we had our own systems of doing things. And then I'm out here as being some kind of, freak against technology. That's not it. I just want it to be a conscious decision. And I think that we need more conscious decisions in relation to the transformation and the technology that we are using.
That's a very important point. Do one of you want to add to this? Do you have a thought on this?
I think it's also the question of funding, right? Because there are a lot of alternative systems that are developed with public money, but they are never as good. And I mean, talking about Google Docs, I've tried using this Nextcloud. We use it all the time at work, and I cannot collaborate in it. I mean, it's just also about the quality of those tools and the resources that are available to actually develop that. And unfortunately, this is the case that Silicon Valley has much more money than public institutions. But I mean, this is such a big question. I'm not sure we can really fix it.
So Marcel, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and how good the tools might be. We as scientists have one capacity that the tools not so clearly have. We are human beings that have a relation to societal questions. Let me elaborate a bit on this. When an AI system makes a better diagnosis than the doctor, we prefer the AI system, and the doctor can look for another job. But in art, it's different. It's much harder to judge whether an AI system creates better art than the artist. Because in artworks, the background of the person and the society in which the person works are also important in judging what is good art. And now our society, our science, is somewhere between the doctor and the artist. But ultimately, political science is more like the artist. Political science is a reflection of society in which history and contingency play a role. And there are no objective standards to judge what is the best reflection. That depends on society, and that depends on the context. You can say every society gets the political science that it deserves. So political science cannot be judged by objective utilitarian standards. Political science has to be done by human beings. And of course, they can use all kinds of AI tools, but in the connection to the large questions in society, it must be done by human beings. Otherwise, it would be technocracy. And we as political scientists, we know how problematic technocracy is.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. So, Priya, do you have a view on this from like a publisher side? When researchers use these commercial tools, do you see potential problems from your end of the publishing process?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first point to make is, I think that was raised at the beginning, that, tools are not going to erase the role of researchers, and hopefully they're not going to erase the role of publishers either. And I actually think, there's even more of a need for the human intervention to be able to sort of sift through some of these tools. And again, another point that was made was that it's really important to be proactive and not reactive on this. And in this way, we can potentially shape some of these tools, or at least kind of champion the advent of new tools onto the horizon. So I think from a publisher's point of view, I think the main one is probably around, the legal framework. So things like copyright and intellectual property, they're still very vague and need a lot of work around them. So, how can we sort of work as a publishing community, I guess, to work with our legal teams, clarify what some of these policies are related to AI generated content. That's probably where we've got quite a role to play. Other things that we can do is, work on what some of our ethical guidelines are to complement some of those legal aspects. And also we're working more and more with researchers to try and get them to share more of the code and the data that they've used with the AI tool to generate the research content. And that will help with some of the issues that we're seeing around transparency and reproducibility. And I think finally, sort of in this sort of world of needing to evolve, clearly peer review will need to evolve to take into account the fact that, we will have content that's been submitted that may wittingly or unwittingly have been generated by generative AI. So, if we can look at tools that include experts in those fields, and work out maybe how we harness some of these new roles, like, AI engineers probably never even existed before. How can we harness some of these roles to actually help the industry grow? I think that's probably where we have a role to play as well.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. And this is a very nice transition to my next question that I have in mind. Right. So now we talked about potential issues, but also benefits here. And of course, as researchers, we need to think about the ecosystem we operate in, right? So there are two sets of questions. We'll start with our scholarly panelists before then handing over back to you, Priya. On the question like, what are the best practices for using AI? How should we handle this matter, right? How can we create reproducible research, for example, right? A question that has been at the core of the debates in political science over the last 10-ish years. And how can we approach this? And then, of course, what can publishers do to assist us here? Given that, Elizaveta, you are, in my view, the proponent of AI, the use of AI in this panel, when you think of this from a more positive point of view, and particularly focusing on the benefits, what do you think, what kind of best practices do we need in order to be able to use AI in our research and create an environment that allows us to communicate the use of it to other scholars, reproducibility, etc.? What are your thoughts on this?
I wouldn't call myself a proponent of AI. I guess I'm just not that much against it. So I think that it's important to understand how to handle data in AI systems, right? So if, for example, if we're dealing with systems like ChatGPT, we need to treat any kind of input into the system as releasing it to the public. And that's, I mean, we do that. We release our data into the public. So we just need to be aware that this is not a private chat, but this is sort of a public chat. That said, I do not believe it's exactly the same. The way data is treated when you are releasing it into the public is very readable, right? It's very accessible. And if you're feeding it into a data set, it's treated as big data, which is quite a different way of treating data. But still, it's important to just be aware of that and not treat it as a private chat. Then I guess it is also important, like if you are working with data produced by generative AI, it is important to properly acknowledge that in your work. And there may be different ways of different levels of generative AI's involvement into the process, right? Either it's just completely producing big chunks of text, or it's just proofreading your work and maybe helping you a bit with brainstorming and dealing with academic isolation or something like Marcel mentioned. And then maybe if it's just used for it's not used as just taking chunks of text and then putting them into your work, then it can be a small disclaimer. And if it's a graph produced or something like that, then it has to be a proper citation. And I guess this would be the job of the publishers to develop those criteria for how exactly to cite work from ChatGPT, how to cite different levels of that production process. So yeah, I don't have a clear answer, but I think it's important to come up with such guidelines. And then I think it's important to verify anything that comes out of those systems, but I think that this applies for anything. I don't think any kind of type of information you read should be taken at face value. Yeah, and then in case of if we are unsure what's going on and how to deal with it, I think it's important to just consult with professionals like data protection officers, ethical committee, and so on and so forth. So I think there should just be an open discussion. There should be an awareness of that this is not like a neutral thing. It's an evolving thing, and we do not really know exactly how to deal with it. So in case of doubt, just ask what to do. Yeah, I guess it's...
If I may follow up on this and maybe play it back to you in just a second. So what I find quite curious, when we look at how sharing data and sharing code has become the standard in the discipline over the last 10 years, right? 10 years ago, you could publish and most journals wouldn't ask you about anything, right? And these days, a lot of journals, or some journals even require you that they can replicate your analysis on their machine. And if it's not running, then you have to explain what's going on there, right? But with code, this is one thing. But with AI, and as we've discussed before, given that the responses are very targeted to the way you phrase questions, the person you are, other interactions you had, etc., this is much more unique in a sense, right? So this begs the question, how can we in a standardized way communicate this? Would you then just suggest to copy paste the chat and put it in the appendix? Or what are your thoughts on this? Or do you have, I don't want to pin you down on this. I'm just like, would kind of like to hear what you think about this.
I think it depends on your level of proficiency with those technologies. So if you are just a user and you do not know how to use an API, for example, then perhaps, yeah, you have to just record all the chats and then present that as your process, so to say. But I think that if you are using it more professionally, or not even through existing systems, but just using the model and then putting your own structure on it, then you can control for consistency, you can set the temperature, and that way you can ensure consistency much better. Yeah.
And I mean, we are right in this debate at the moment, right? So this is really where we stand. So this is why it's quite important to discuss these things and how we can standardize this in the future. So, Malin, when we prepared for this, you mentioned that as part of your position when funding research projects, you've discussed the use of AI or generative AI as well. So did you set any guidelines or best practice rules that you expect people to follow, or how did you handle this? What was your thought on this in this process?
Well, for this year, because everything is, as we know, happening very fast, we just have new instructions for our panels, the reviewers of all the applications, that they need to be aware that we could have applications this year that actually are written by, for example, ChatGPT. But on the other hand, we have had earlier on no rules against, for example, using consultancy firms when writing an application, or using, Google Translate or whatever. So we have decided that there is not an issue. We are not at this moment asking the people that write applications to note if they have done it themselves or not. I'm not sure if we're gonna do that in the future, but what we have in the instructions for our panels is to be more aware of that this could be the case, and actually try to look behind the glossy kind of package of an application. Because of course, this also means all our applications are written in English. And using, ChatGPT, for example, could, of course, improve the whole package of the application. But it's still, as I have heard from several others in this panel, that, of course, the ideas come from the researchers. So it's more of an first discussion, and I'm sure that we will have this, as one of our discussions items in the committee on the upcoming during the fall and the upcoming year. But could I also just comment on this discussion on replication and open data and reproducibility? Because I also think it's very important to acknowledge that the field, the political science kind of research field is also very broad when it comes to methods and methodology. And I think these discussions are mainly related. For example, I've been in the discussions around open data as a qualitative researcher. I find this discussion very driven from a quantitative research perspective. And just to pick up on one of the things that was said earlier on by Elizaveta, that, for example, what happens if I take my interview transcripts and feed them into ChatGPT? Would that be to kind of give them away? Yes, in a way, but as you also said, this, it's not as I would, put them online because it's transformed into what we call big data. But I think that there are other aspects that we need to reflect on when it comes to different types of data, and also our thoughts about what could be replicated, for example. It's also very much depending on what kind of epistemology you have when you, for example, are doing qualitative research. I think this is partly part of this discussion, but it's also part of the more, broader discussion on open data.
That's an excellent point. Thank you also for bringing this perspective in, right? Because quite often we think of this in very quantitative terms, as you could see by my remarks to replication, for example, which is mostly something that's discussed in more quantitative research. So Marcel, do you have thoughts on this? Where do you see the best practice, or where do you see that we need to be very, very careful in how we operate here?
Well, as a non-empirical scientist, I'm always deeply impressed by the methodological considerations that I can read in each paper, and also in this conference, different panels I heard very interesting methodological discussions. So indeed, the way we use these systems, the way we use AI, should be part of the methodological part in the future. And we should start educating students about that starting tomorrow, that they make explicit, because they are the start of the younger generation, and they are the future researchers, that they know that the way you use AI systems should be intrinsic part of your methodological considerations. That's one. Another thing is, we have done in our faculty, in our department, we've done some work on research online survey platforms. I don't mention any names, but will know what I'm talking about. Online, and there is a huge difference in quality, but also in ethics, the way they treat people. So don't say immediately there is no alternative. There might be different tools, there might be different systems, and you use the systems that not only are the best, but only the morally best systems. And that will be an ongoing discussion in the research community.
Thank you, Marcel. I'm super excited. There are 2 questions from the audience. That's really great. So 3, 4 even. So Priya, we'll come back to the publisher side, because I guess most of these questions are more focused on the research side in a second. So may I hand over to you?
Yeah, hi, my name is Zuzana Ringlarova. I'm from Masaryk University in Brno. I am one of the optimists about AI, but my optimism right now is engulfed in kind of panic that I feel like I don't understand. Like, as one of the panelists said, we should know what's going on and we should use it properly. I was like, yeah, I agree. How? So I would like to ask if you have any tips for reliable sources where we can learn about what the weaknesses are, what the strengths are of different tools, because there is not just the chatbots, and there's different kinds of chatbots. It's not just ChatGPT. There is the Research Rabbit that helps you with assessing literature. There is Consensus, which finds the consensus in the literature for you. can I trust it? Like, how does it work? What should I be aware of if I use it? And also with regard to our students, because I teach a methodology class and our students will be using ChatGPT and they will be, no matter whether I mention them or not. So I feel like it's my role to tell them what the strengths and weaknesses are. And I am still looking for the reading for this class to educate myself and the students. So if there is no resource, would you consider writing something like that? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Who would like to respond? Malin, do you would like to respond to this question? Or Elizaveta, given that you brought up some of these points already?
Yes, sure. I think there's so much right now about how exactly to use it and what are different possibilities and pitfalls. Even if you ask ChatGPT what are the problems with it, it will give you pretty much everything that has been said on this panel. So it is aware of its own pitfalls, so to say, or rather of the discourses around it. I think that there are just these main points that have to be taken into consideration, that just not to be fooled that it's a private chat, perhaps is the most important one, right? And probably this is the most easy to forget because, you know, it's so easy to chat with it and then you want to just input something there and then get the output back and you forget, oh, maybe this is actually not what I'm supposed to put in there. So I think this is the main consideration. But other than that, there's also a lot developing, and actually even at this conference there are being different tools presented for political science research that are based on the same principles but are not using any private data, but is actually using properly known data sets, not like this unknown corpus that we don't know, like we don't know what ChatGPT was trained on, right? And there are more and more tools like that are being developed using the same pipeline, so to say, like the process of, well, I won't get into details about that, but yeah, so basically there is a lot of different new tools that will be available or are already available and may not have the same problems as ChatGPT has or any other tools that are owned by big tech companies. And I think the only problem with those newer tools is that they may not have such an easy interface. So there is a learning curve there. Yeah.
Just to add to that, to catch your final point, that's of course it's this should not be an individual quest, right? Every researcher shouldn't have to start from the beginning. And so your last point saying, well, can't there be something collective developed? That's exactly what, for example, the scholarly society can do. So that's something for ECPR also to think about, to collect together this kind of knowledge and bring it together, the tools, but also or knowledge about the tools, but also the soft skills that we expect of each other in this. So it's a good suggestion. Should we? So there was a question there. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Inga Olmetsson and I'm from the Montfort University, and recently I edited a special issue on politics and policy of artificial intelligence in Review of Policy Research, where we have articles from Malin and also many other colleagues. And as we are in political science conference, I wanted to ask panel members if you have also, if you want to say something and share your views on bigger politics and power behind generative AI and ChatGPT and other large language models, who benefits from these models in society? Why are companies making huge investments in training these models without any monetization so far? Well, there are some ideas that there will be also like a paid version of it. Is it sustainable financially, also technologically and environmentally, because there's also huge energy use for training these models? So what are your views on these political and social issues? I know that Malin certainly has views, but I hope also other panel members have some views on this.
So Marcel, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, the concentration of power is not good. And we have in the history of philosophy, we have seen there was power concentration, and later we had trias politica, and we had division of power in society. And sometimes we have to accept that democracy and bureaucracy are less efficient than when the power would have concentrated in one person or one hand, but we want to pay the price for that. And that parallel might be also relevant for for AI. Because when the power of the tech companies is because when the data can be combined from different fields by one tech company, that gathers a lot of knowledge. So the big tech is very effective because it is big, because it has big data. It has so it's very hard to break them into pieces or to split them into several parts. It might be the case that we then have to pay the price that the quality of the service they deliver is less. Because why are they so powerful? Because they deliver services of such a high quality, and they deliver service from a high quality because they have so many data. When you split them, when you break that power, then it might be the case that the quality of services is diminishing, but we have to pay the price, I think. So that is one of the topics that is at stake here.
Thanks a lot. There are a couple more questions. So, okay, so 1 and then 2 and then 3 and 4. Okay, but then we need to make sure that we also make our program.
Okay, Marco from Royal Holloway. I go a little bit provocative, but really out of how stimulating is this debate. So one point to all the panelists is like, we have said that these tools are not neutral. What's that we want? Do we want them to be neutral or differently not neutral? Because I want the second, I don't have any doubts. And if so, I think that these tools have no biases. They are racist, sexist, and capitalist because they are perfectly entrenched in this social system. What's the point? Do we want them to be neutral? And what's this neutrality, of course, or not? And the second provocation relates to what also Malin was saying about the naivete of taking action, right? So I agree. This afternoon, I will still use Google and whatever tool is available there. But on a more structural level, isn't it more naive to try to run after some company in Palo Alto, trying to regulate them, when we know that probably this won't succeed? And how can we stand up to a problem that for me is giant? So if anything resembles a transnational public sphere is the academic community, which should have the highest level of knowledge in the world. How is it possible that not the content, not the use of certain tools, okay, or how we do the tools, but the rules of what comes out from these platforms is not self-governed by the academic community, but is decided by a few companies? So these were my provocation.
Thanks a lot. Malin, I saw you nodding. So what are your thoughts on this? I think this was also partly addressed directly to you. So how do you feel about that?
Yes, very short. I don't think that these tools could ever be neutral, of course. So I just think that we need to acknowledge them. How I think that's also kind of agreeing with the speaker that asked me this. I think that again that we need to be more conscious on that technology is inherently political. I think that's a kind of a mistake that we don't see that as political scientists. That's not all the time. We still uses the tools as if they were only tools and not part of a system, or what you would like to call it, and we have been discussing, I brought this up several times already, but around, the Silicon Valley companies, it's actually steering us in this. I think that I think I'm quite frustrated over, and I think I've shared this with the person that that put the question to me, that we not as a more of a community could do something in relation to this. Instead, it's kind of, and I see this as a form of how we also are governed in a way as academics, that it comes down to our own individual decision all the time. So all the time, every time I go into a website, I use like a couple of minutes to decline cookies. I know it's, you know, maybe worthless, but I still do it because I want to do some kind of protest. And I think that in a more, if we could, in a more collective way, have a discussion on the usage of these tools, and also I think that there is a lot of interesting and important political science research that could be done around how technology is inherently political and what that means. Of course, there are more and more from our disciplines that are engaging these topics, but there is still so much more to do. And maybe this is also because I don't know, I get a feeling from when listening to the question that there is, you know, that there is an eager for some kind of protest here. And I think that we could do things together. And for example, this the knowledge that we need to get that were discussed earlier, I also think that needs to be part of what we demand from our institutions. We need support. We need, you know, we cannot, in the situation that we find ourselves as academics, we don't really have the time. We need more backup on this. So this was parts of the answer, but I don't think that there is not, for me, there is no such thing as neutrality. It's just that we need to acknowledge the political dimensions and the power dimensions of technology as well as we do for everything else that we research.
Thanks a lot. So with 3 more questions, try to keep it short-ish. You want to go first?
Okay, thank you, distinguished scholars. My name is Szymon Andrzejewski. I came here from University of Gdańsk. And as I understand, there was mentioned here about, you know, the bias of this algorithm, which is, let's say, a problem. Well, but I want to turn around this problem, you know. Let's imagine that in social science for many years and decades, there was a unsolved problem of the bias of the people and its effects to the research, the research outputs. And let's imagine that those, you know, those AI could, for example, assess people's, let's say, research, and could also try to make some kind of assessment if those researchers are biased in some way, for example. Because I'm a fan of Michał Kosiński's attitude to the AI and his works, when he says that by, you know, analyzing a large amount of personal data, you can just those AI and algorithm can assess the differences and some equations that are invisible to the human's eye and human, let's say, comprehension. So maybe this is rather this AI and algorithm is rather a chance than a challenge.
Thanks. Marcel, would you like to respond to this? Do you have...
Well, it reminds me of the statement of Pedro Domingos, who has said that many people think that computers are smart and will take over the world, but the truth is that they are stupid and already have taken over the world. So that might be at stake also in this topic. But...
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's just machines are probably actually neutral, and they just see what the patterns that exist in our research, in the content that we produce, in general outputs that exist. So I don't know. We cannot really change the history of knowledge. Right, what we can do is to produce new knowledge that is less biased, and but that's been a challenge all the time, and it continues to be one.
It's an interesting point, though, that of course machines to replicate, and this was related to the previous point, to replicate what we know at the moment will just continue our biases forward, right? So the interesting question is, how can we address this and tackle this? Do you want to say something? Yeah.
Well, I guess just to produce unbiased research and to continue producing unbiased content. I don't think that we can really change. I mean, we have to acknowledge, of course, that a lot of the information that is out there is biased, but I think we're doing that anyway. We have acknowledged that. So from now on, we just have to make sure that we change this pattern. And then the machines will also reflect the change in that pattern.
Of course, it's an interesting philosophical question, because when neutrality doesn't exist, the machine can't be neutral, neither can we be neutral. So we should have the discussion of what is the bias of the machine and what is our bias or our presupposition of our score value, what is our focus, and how does what the machine delivers relate to what we consider to be important. In that respect, we must have a biased dialogue between human beings and machines, because as Malin says, neutrality doesn't exist.
Thanks. We have two more questions. Then I would also like to bring Priya back in, because she has definitely something to say from the publisher side. So if you could,
can I go?
Yeah.
Thanks. I think it's a really interesting debate. So I'm Francesco Bailo from University of Sydney. I'm really worried about the impact of AI on society, especially because of how it can be normalized and just use it without actually asking what is happening within the box and what data is behind the box. But I'm really optimistic about how AI can be, and specifically generative AI, so large language model and also image models can be used in a research setting. The reason is that, again, as Elizaveta mentioned before, AI is something somehow portable. So we can have our own systems that are basically using data that we control, so a corpus or a set of images. And so I have a question for the panel. So I've been working for years in mixed research groups. So qualitative and quantitative computer scientists. I'm worried. I'm wondering, whether you perceive any, because I'm pretty optimistic on this, but I wonder what you think. Whether you think, whether you have any reflection on the possibility that generative AI can actually help bridge qualitative and quantitative research. Because of course we know that it's really extremely challenging, but in some sense, if we practice this kind of approach and we construct some sort of methods around it, we might possibly have kind of a much faster turnout, a much faster communication, where you have big data that are transforming into qualitative appreciable data and the other way around. So qualitative researchers can actually interrogate in a qualitative way a big data set. So I'm wondering what you think about this opportunities.
Elizaveta, I saw you nod a lot.
I think it's already happening. So it's I was just at a political communication conference last week, and researchers are already using different AI systems like ChatGPT 4 and its API to qualitatively investigate texts, mainly publicly available texts, of course, not private data. And they design a pipeline where you can, they then do an intercoder reliability test, and it usually performs something like, I don't know if it's Krippendorf, something like 0.7, which is not ideal, but also not horrible. And there are ways of improving that. And so right now there's a lot of research trying to just build those pipelines, how to create a series of prompts.
I didn't do anything. So there was one more question.
Yeah, just a brief question. I heard a few times that humans should be on top. And I do not disagree, but I have problems to find justifications that convince me. So ChatGPT is used for developing algorithms. So why should not ChatGPT write a political science article, or should that be judged differently from an article written by master students or an old professor?
Marcel?
Well, I have the idea that when we use strict utilitarian frameworks in which we objectively could say what is best, and when we could measure that in objective standards, then AI would then you might prove that AI writes better articles than human beings. But I'm not a utilitarian. Sorry for utilitarians. I think there is more more in the world than the utilitarian frameworks. And usually I see the justifications of AI doing it better than human beings in that narrow utilitarian framework. And that's why I lay the I draw the parallel with art and the artist, and said that political scientists also are related, have a connection to what artists are. So that is my standpoint at this moment. I hope it's an answer to your question.
But this is a fantastic point to bring Priya back in, because this has broad implications, right? What is if we just use an article, write it, submit it to a Taylor and Francis journal and publish it? In a sense, like, what are the normative implications here? What are the worries that Taylor and Francis, for example, could have? And this relates a bit back to the question I had in mind before handing off to all the questions. So what can publishers do to, on the one hand, support this? Or what are the discussions that you have currently on how you can support scholars using AI? But also, what are the concerns you have? What are the policies? Do you have debates at the moment? And is there something that you think is important to say at this point?
Yeah, I mean, we have plenty of internal debate and external debate like we're having now. We've kind of produced quite a lot of public policy positions on our website. And behind those positions, we also have an internal working group from all different walks of the business, including technology, ethics, policy, to try and kind of formulate some of the responses to what the role of publishers should be. Because obviously we're getting questions all the time, and we're I'm trying to think of a polite way of saying making it up as we go along, but, you know, essentially coming up with use cases to try and come up with what the policies are behind them, because essentially we don't know what we don't know. So it's often a question that's submitted to us, and then we try and think about what we would do in that situation. But, you know, just to sort of summarize what some of the main things are playing on our mind, I would say, you know, it's really our role to be this kind of arbiter of like research integrity is a way really of saying it, which is kind of in line with what everybody's saying here from the academic side as well. You know, we really want to make sure that the research that's submitted to us is not plagiarized and that is original. You know, we don't know what the AI generated content may or may not have done. We don't know really so much about it. And in a world where we're being kind of looked at, especially by governments, to produce, you know, rigorous, well-documented information in an ethical way, we you know, we're really responsible about that role. And you know, this kind of huge area that generative AI has to generate misinformation and fake science would essentially erode that trust that's placed in us, you know, not just by kind of governments and public policies, but by the public itself. So it's a role we take really responsibility for, and you know, anything that we can do to sort of keep making sure that happens. I mean, specifically when an author submits a paper to us, what we're saying really in a nutshell at the moment is that they really need to cite where they've used ChatGPT to help us with the peer review process. Obviously, and I think Elizaveta, if you referred to this before, we can't guarantee that authors will or won't do that, but we place very much the onus on the author or researcher to do that, and we don't accept papers that have been fully written by ChatGPT, in line with one of the questions around utilitarian as well. Like, you know, we still see it as a very human act. So we still say that, you know, essentially a human needs to have at least oversight or ultimate accountability for the paper. But I encourage people who are interested to, you know, to have a look around our website, see what's out there in terms of what other publishers have done. It's very much aligned. We're also planning on coming up with a group of principles that will be signed off by the trade associations and other publishers, you know, signing up to what we see some of the key principles being in AI, and you know, just to highlight, it'll be some of the things that you can imagine that we would be interested in from a publisher's perspective. So you know, intellectual property, for example, transparency, accountability, to name a few. And you know, this kind of harks back to the question of, you know, big companies potentially packaging up content and selling it on. We want to really make sure that fairness, equity, intellectual property are all sort of part of that debate as well.
So do you think that there's a risk that any of these developments mean that academic research may, or that there might be a public perception that academic research may seem to have less to offer, you know, in the public eye? These developments with that sort of broaden the access to some of these tools. Is there any risk like that? What do the rest of you think? Is there any risk of that?
Well, yeah, I think compared to what happened to news media, traditional news media had monopoly on news. And now with social media, the circulation of news. So there might be a parallel, but that means that we as academic researchers have to stress that there are certain things that we do that, let's say, normal people can't do. And perhaps we should be more aware of that, of the added value of the kind of things that we do. And also make clear in our publications what is the added value of these publications. Otherwise, we face the danger of gaining less credibility, like has happened to many traditional news media. That is, at least it's a challenge.
I think that there's definitely a danger that it might be perceived that way, and I think that the fact that you're asking this question is the proof of that. But I do not think that research will disappear or become less valuable. Not at all. For example, we have had this for many years now, that journalists would publish work using AI. And we probably don't even know that. We might have read those articles online and never noticed. So does it mean that generally the quality of journalism is gonna deteriorate? Maybe it will and maybe it is, but I'm not sure only for the reason of because of AI. I think there are a lot of other reasons. So I think it's just we have to maybe as scientists really prove ourselves now, you know, that we are able to still produce quality research. And maybe we'll have to indeed just acknowledge it more and more, that, or maybe it will become a value that, well, I wrote this article without any ChatGPT. So something like that. Yeah.
That makes sense. Malin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just quickly, I think that maybe we should argue for that today also what we, you know, not only in relation to different kind of generative AI, but also what we have been discussing concerning social media and the challenges that they have brought to so-called traditional or old-fashioned media. I think maybe now is the point that we are, you know, to show ourselves as more important than ever. Because who could actually navigate in this, you know, situation of transformations that we are in? That should be us. We should actually, I don't know if we need to prove ourselves to be, you know, real or whatever. I just think that we should be seeing ourselves as more important than ever. Also coming back to Marcel's argument on that there are still things that humans, only humans could do and should do, and that we want it to be that way, that we actually want to keep some dimensions of research, life and society as ours, because we think it's important. And I think there is also a possibility in to actually show ourselves as more important. I think that large parts of society is struggling. People are struggling with, you know, who could we trust? What is this? You know, the whole kind of world image is falling apart for many people. And I think there, independent scholars has a very important part to play.
Okay, excellent. So given that we're quite far ahead in time already. I would like to ask each panelist to formulate a take-home message in like a minute. What's kind of the main point you take away from our discussions today? Where do you see us heading? What's really important to consider? In a sense, what's your appeal to everyone here in the audience or listening online? So maybe, do you want to start, Marcel?
Okay, of course, philosopher take-home message, it's a paradox. Because there's a really fascinating paradox going on. The system threats to undermine just those capacities that we need to deal properly with the system. Said otherwise, the system, AI, tends to make us lazy, but more than ever we have to be alert.
Thanks a lot. Elizaveta, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I think it's just important that we don't necessarily always fall again into this discourse of threat and fear, because I feel there's still a lot of positives in those technology developments, and we can still direct it the way that helps us as researchers, publishers, human beings to just do our daily activities. So there is a lot of opportunities, and we need to see them. And also, even if we want to regulate those platforms, those systems, we need to understand how they work. And if we do not study them and just sort of block them, I think this will become problematic because we cannot really stop the process. People are already using them. They will not stop using them. And that's important just to acknowledge. It's there and we have to deal with it. Yeah.
Malin, may I ask you for your take-home message?
Yes, thank you. I would like to say that there is no black box to open up. I think that's something that we quite often say. We need to open up the black box. We need to make things more transparent. We need to avoid or get rid of biases. I think that whole discussion is actually making us believe that there could be a neutrality here, and that we also could, when we talk about generative AI, there is no such thing as the black box, because it's already, it's out there in a way. So I think that instead, having a discussion on questions of power and politics when it comes to both how we use generative AI, how generative AI is also used in society. We are good at this. We know politics. We are political scientists. And I think in combination with being conscious and reflexive around how we also use different kinds of AI tools, and not least forgetting or try to not forget that we are actually partly in the hands of the big tech companies from Silicon Valley. How, just think and reflect about this. But I recently read a book by Louise Amore called Cloud Ethics, which I think it's a great book, and where she points to this. There is no outside of the algorithm. We are actually being produced. We are producing society together with algorithms today, and we need to take that position instead of trying to open up the black box. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And Priya, maybe finally, what are your takeaway messages from the publisher side?
Thank you. Well, hopefully what I'm going to say kind of resonates with what we've been talking about. So the first thing I want to say is that we need to strike that balance between innovation and ethical responsibility. So obviously we talked a lot about the benefits, so we should definitely embrace AI's potential. It's there to democratize access to information and accelerate research, but at the same time, we need to remain super vigilant about what those challenges are and make sure that the standards we all uphold in the community are very much academic integrity. But my second point was more about the working together piece. And I think somebody in the audience raised about, what societies can do, what we can do to raise government awareness, how we can actually identify sort of resources and guidance. And I think that point's really important. So if we are saying that AI is here to stay, which it clearly is, and there is no black box to open, then, let's work collaboratively, publishers, researchers, everybody. It is about different perspectives, but we've all got the same goal in mind. So how can we as a collective, work together that the AI does enhance rather than undermines, that betterment of society that we're all there for.
Thanks a lot. So shall we hand over to the closing statement?
So thank you all. But before we thank you properly, the panelists, and close, Simona and I would now like to take this opportunity to say thank you and goodbye from the journal. It's truly been an honor and a privilege to found and build this journal. We are very, very proud of what the journal has become and has achieved in its first 5 years. The journal has achieved the traditional marker of quality this year with a first impact factor of 2.4, which places it in the first quartile of journals in political science. But we've also built this, we tried to build this with integrity. And among other things, we've attained near gender parity in our published lead authors, and female leads now make up more than half of the submissions, for example, which has been a focus area of ECPR. And we've also achieved key markers of for the open access movement, or from the perspective of open access, such as reaching a global audience outside the subscription model infrastructure all over the world. Our articles are downloaded more than 250,000 times in over 175 countries, and this is something that really makes us proud. So of course, we didn't do this by ourselves, and we have many people to thank. I want to start by thanking you, Simona, because you can't do it. So I'm directing this to you for these very intense years, being co-editors, bringing your enormous enthusiasm and experience and energy to this. And also for answering all my emails within 5 minutes, even though I ask the same thing in different ways over and over again. You always answered everyone. And this has been the effort of a much larger and a very, very brilliant team. And so we would like to thank our associate editors who have been brilliant for your commitment and your excellence. You truly deserve credit and recognition for this. And conscious of the time, I won't read all of your names, but I will mention the first, Isabel Barucki, who is here and who can get the credit. We also thank our wonderful editorial coordinators who have been with us throughout the years, who really do keep the team running, Mary Sensi, Rebecca Dalve, and Charlie Brown. We're very thankful to the ECPR for doing this, but also for supporting us during this time, for clear-headed guidance and constructive input, especially thanking Rebecca Geffen and Kate Hawkins. And finally, to you, Hugh Price, Political Science Portfolio Manager at Routledge, Taylor and Francis, who is the true host of this panel as well. Both a scholar and a publisher, you understand and care about both worlds. And that together with your sense of diplomacy at all times, it's made all the difference to this journal and to this project. So thank you very much from us. And we want to wish the new team the very best of luck. You're a terrifically put together team, and we're envious of this fantastic adventure that you're about to begin. So good luck to you. And I remind you that these people and us, we will be available at Meet the Editors if you want to publish in this first quarter, Q1 journal, and Meet the Editors after this session.
Let me first of all thank you and Simona and all the people that you mentioned in this presentation, because at the end of the day, we are standing on the shoulders of giants because you created this journal, build it up, and we have an excellent journal to take over. We really look forward to build on the fantastic foundation. So thank you so much to both of you, to Hugh, to all the associate editors who are partly here and partly not here, who put in such an excellent shift. So we really, really appreciate this. I would also like to mention that not only is Stephen and Martha here, but also Lisa managed to arrive. So just that you can put a face to the name. And in order to close this panel, so thank you for the excellent work. Thank you for co-chairing this panel with me. And thank you very much to all the panelists who shared their insights, both online and here in person, as well as the excellent questions from the audience, because we really saw, I'm kind of closing down the discussion, but the discussion just started, right? Clearly, over the next years, we will discuss so much about this issue. Then it was fantastic to start here, and I hope to continue this in the future with all of you. So thank you very much, and I look forward to meeting a lot of you at the Meet the Editors after this panel. So thank you very much.